Criteria of God alone does not line up, nor can you juxtapose on that any type of organized religion that we know of, including the Catholic Church, as wealthy as it was. I'll tell you, I was laughing because everybody used to always talk about the Catholic Church and all the property they were owning and as much property as they would be gathering, because everybody knows the Catholic Church does it. They've acquired large masses of property, but they sold a lot off. I was really surprised when I read the statistic of who owned the most valuable real estate in the world. It's McDonald's. They far surpassed the Catholic Church in land value. And I guess if it ain't the Catholic Church, it must be McDonald's. It's going to be this great harlot. Now in chapter 16, what we have here, and again, things like that, the fact that the Catholic Church was amassing land, the many conspiracy theorists, they put these battle lines literally drawn between international bankers and the Catholic Church, both of them literally fighting for control of the minds of the people. And they've turned it into such a fight that many of the authors on either side, they accuse each other of being this great harlot. But at the end of the 16th chapter, when we see the last vial of wrath poured out, God suddenly remembers Babylon. And God's got something special for her. In the 18th chapter, when she's destroyed, in verse 11, the merchants of the earth will weep, mourn over her. No man buys her merchandise anymore. So Babylon becomes literally a system by which everybody purchases, or everybody has the ability to take from her the merchandise. Everybody wants what she has. Verse 12, the merchandise of gold, silver, precious stones, pearls, fine linen, purple, silk, scarlet, all the fine wood, all manner of vessels of ivory, all manners of vessels of most precious wood, brass, iron, marble, cinnamon, odors, ointments, frankincense, wine, oil, fine flour, wheat, beasts, sheep, horses, chariots, slaves, souls of men. And the fruits that thy soul lusted after are departed from thee. So these are the things she possesses. Everything you want, whatever you need, she has. So this becomes even a greater criteria that we must take a look at. This is not going to be some organized religion. I remember several years ago I was at a convention where they had these men who called themselves prophets. And they were speaking with the people, and one of them began to prophesy that God was going to restore or turn over to the Christians communications. He was going to turn over to the Christians energy. That he was going to turn over to the Christians transportation. And he sat and I thought about this and said, oh, he's going to give Christians literally leverage in everything there is. I'm still waiting for that prophecy to come to pass by Old Testament standards. That fellow should be dead now. All right? And if you read your Bible, you know that's not going to happen. But this fellow, I guess he was just preaching a good word so they can fill his bucket with money. But according to the Word of God, if these things don't come to pass, you're supposed to stone the fella. That's what the Bible says. If a prophet says something and it doesn't come to pass, you stone him to death. You teach him a lesson for saying God said when he didn't say. So that's Babylon. Now we've been putting together some of these books. We've been talking about what best describes Babylon or how Babylon fits in this. We've read the book of Daniel. We've read portions of 2nd Ezra. We figured out that God is going to not only judge those nations that oppressed Israel, those nations that always had their foot on the neck of Israel, but that God now has something in store for that power behind the power, that voice behind the heads that speaks, that which has existed throughout governments, throughout these powers that have risen and sat down in history. And in the book of Daniel, when it describes the vision of Nebuchadnezzar, and as often as we go through it, I hope you figured it out by now. Nebuchadnezzar, thou, O king, art the head of gold. That was Nebuchadnezzar's kingdom. The two arms joined at the breast, inferior kingdom. Not just because it was two, not just because it was the Medes and the Persians combined, but he typified it not as gold but as silver, inferior to them. It would not carry through. The gold will carry through till the end of time. But a silver, it's an inferior kingdom. And then you've got the belly of brass, which was literally speaking of the Greeks that were coming. The legs of iron, Rome. And then you've got that miry clay mingled with Rome. So you've got clay and iron. So it's going to be the iron of the European Roman mingled with that which is from the Semitic. A mixture. And then the last kingdom is the 10-toe, or that which is the 10 horn. And then the last one is the stone cut without hands. In this vision of Daniel, that stone cut without hands, which is the kingdom or the government of Christ, it strikes the image in the foot and it crumbles from the head to the toe. The Bible says that it, like chaff, is just flown away, taken into the wind. But this image and everything that carries through it, it does not go away, it does not fall. It did not just rise up to fall down with each kingdom that was to come after. We're literally carrying through all of these. And they still exist, or remnants of it, aspects of it exist even today. And this is why this image does not fall down or does not get carried off in the chaff until after the stone kingdom arrives. So while in fact we do not have a silver kingdom, we carry remnants of that silver kingdom even in our life and society, despite the fact that we're not ruled over by the Greeks. We are carrying with us, even in our educational system, much of what this brass kingdom gave to us. Literature, philosophies, mathematics. Same thing with Rome, government. Much of what these nations have left us, we still carry today. That's why it's such a joke sometimes when you start learning history and they just refer to it as Western civilization as if it started in the West. We've already talked about this. It didn't start in the West. And I don't want to break anybody's bubble, but it didn't start in China either. It didn't start in all those other places people tell you. It started back, again, Genesis 10. If our studies in ethnology do not include Genesis chapter 10, wind it up, stick it in your ear somewhere else. All right, so we're carrying through with ourselves, or we're carrying through even till today. We're carrying remnants of these kingdoms, and they don't fall until that stone kingdom or until the kingdom of Christ comes. So as we read that God has unleashed seals, God has unleashed trumpets, God has unleashed these vile judgments, suddenly he's got one judgment. Suddenly Babylon comes to mind. And then he goes into more descriptive chapters of who Babylon is, what she has, what she's done. She's drunk on the blood of the saints. She slept with everybody. She's a harlot. She rides the 7 beasts, which again typify the 7 nations that came against Israel. And God's got something special for her. She actually has something that God wants. That's the loyalty of God's people. Now, we left off talking about, in fact, because we had Jay Louvier here, and then I think I missed the last one. We left off with John Ruskin. Remember old right-hand Ruskin? John Ruskin, philosopher, from where many of these guys, such as Milner, who had his Milner's kindergarten, the starting of these groups referred to as round tables, kind of like the knights of King Arthur. And in these round tables, these individuals determined that they were going to establish a form of government without saying they're a government. These people basically said, we're just a bunch of people interested in social outcomes and social issues, and we get together and we talk about them, and what they never tell you is that everything that they discuss becomes policy. All right? Rich guys. Not just guys like Milner, but you've got Cecil Rhodes, another guy. Dies young, but he leaves all his money. He's one of these Anglophiles, these white guys. Now, I don't say that in the racist terms. It's kind of like that Indian team that called themselves the Fighting Whiteys. And they thought they were going to really turn the tables and make white people feel bad. And white people just went ape and said, we like that. Can we get hats? And now this Indian group don't even have enough money to make the hats that everybody wants to buy. And shirts. I think Sports Illustrated had an article in it where they were asking all these Indian chiefs from these predominant surviving tribes, and they said, are you offended by teams called the Chiefs, the Seminoles, the Braves, and the Warriors? And they said, heck no. 82% of these fellas said, it don't bother us. They're rather flattered that, that white people want to identify with, the strengths and the characteristics of these people and to actually transfer it to sport teams and say, we want our athletes to have these attitudes. That flatters these groups. So they found out that what happened was 82% of the real deal, the Indians said, man, we don't mind. We like it. And then they asked white people, they said, what y'all think? And they said, oh, we think it's offensive. And we think them chiefs, they're just too stupid to know that it is offensive. They just don't know it's offensive yet. So don't you see how these minds work? You know, when we talk about race relations and things, it's hilarious to me because, you know, I used to like that Frito Bandito fella, and I'm Mexican. They took him off the air because they said people think all Mexicans are thieves. And, you know, if you put something like that out, people will think all Mexicans are thieves. That's stupid. Everybody knows that's stupid. But these are prevailing thought. This is what they're gearing us toward. You might think, what's that got to do with anything? It's got everything to do with it. Because it's that prevailing mindset. They know better. We're all dummies. Well, that's how Cecil Rhodes was. Died young, set up a Rhodes Scholarship. And his Rhodes Scholarship is established for the sake of trying to create a group of educated men that have the ability of taking over the world and imposing on it the standards of the English-speaking Anglos. Now, again, as minorities, everybody says, oh, we don't want that. Let's be honest, man. God bless them white boys. I'll tell you what, man, aren't you glad you got a car that you drove here in that got heater and air conditioning? Who did that? Huh? Them white boys. Huh? Nobody wants to talk about that. Everybody always talks about, you know, how bad Whitey is. All the bad things he's done to us. He's really screwed us. Oh, he put us behind the 8 ball. Damn white boys. Huh? Everybody wants to just pitch a, you know, just, they get all bent out of shape about that. Everybody wants to talk about all the bad stuff they did, right? Well, they created space industries we all work at. They gave us jobs. Somebody said, reluctantly, you got one, don't you? Took some of them a while to get to the place where they treated people a little equal, but how you sitting now? People get mad at me. They say, brother, you brown, you sell out. I said, no. I've been to Mexico. I don't want to live there. I've been to Haiti. God knows I don't want to be there any longer than I have to. Spend some time in Guatemala and they can have it. I've been in those Caribbean. I don't care about any of them places. I don't care about none of them places. Been all over Mexico. Man, they can have it. The blessing is here. People don't want to talk about that. The blessing is here. I'll tell you what. You take a piece of paper, you write down all the bad things about this country, you'll have to pull out 10 to talk about the good things. How come nobody talks about the good things? I'm going to tell you something. The devil ain't stupid. The devil wants us crying about that stuff. Because as long as we cry about that stuff, we're never going to get to the place where God wants us, especially in church. So last time you said, thank you, Whitey. It sounds, now people say, that sounds insane, you're crazy. I'll tell you what, I may think it's unjust the way they took California, Arizona, New Mexico, and Texas, and Colorado from Mexico, but you darn right, when I was born and started to understand things, I was glad. Because I'm born here. Not only am I born here, but I'm born here with privilege. I'm like Paul. I'm a citizen. You can't do things to me. And I know my rights and I can talk. I know people get upset because it doesn't make any sense because we just want to always be angry. There's more to be happy about. Man, I've been to Mexico and my house is better than theirs. Man, I've been to folks' house and my TV's better than their TV. My couch, my bed's better than theirs. I got this thing in the side of my hallway. If I turn it a certain way, the heater goes on. Now, I'm going to tell you something. When I do that, I don't curse Whitey. Huh? When I get out of my car and start walking toward the house freezing, and I open my door and shut it behind me, I don't live in a palace, and I don't live in the best side of town, but thank God ain't nobody burglarizing my house. I walk in the bank, got me card, I can cash checks, all that. It ain't like it was in the old days. I'm telling you, there's more good things we can do than things we can't do, and yet we're always crying about what we can't do. We need to knock that stuff off. We need to understand that these fellas have a plan, and part of that plan is to keep us bickering about what color we are and how we're stuck behind the 8 ball, and we're always crying about what disadvantages we have. We sit there and we watch the schools going to hell, can't even teach your kid to read or write, but yet these kids come home and spend more time in our house than they do with the teacher, and then we act like it's the teacher's fault. These fellas had a plan. They want to take the whole world and control it. Now, when we look at these people, I don't care if they come out of American stock, British stock, they come out of Jewish stock, don't matter if they come out of German stock. These men aren't even loyal to their nation. They're not loyal to their people. They're loyal to one thing, money. They don't care about where they came from. They don't care about their roots. They don't care about anything. All they care about is money. They want to be the administrators, the ones that control everything. See, these people, and we've talked enough about these people who know to know who they are. We've talked about the formation of this Council on Foreign Relations. Talked about how they established the United Nations. We talked about how these people have established groups that do nothing but establish intelligence and disseminate their agendas to the general public or to the grassroots at large. And then we get the idea that because these leaders in these organizations or these areas, that they're black, or that they're brown, or that they're yellow, whatever color they are, we get the idea that they're really for us, but they're not. I talked about this. We read about it. These organizations are literally funded by grants, and they're funded by these donations and gifts that white people give them. I told you I'd love that job. I would love to be able to give somebody money so they can call me wetback. Huh? Wouldn't that be wonderful to have so much money? You give it to white people so they can call you pepper belly, chili choker, taco bender. Huh? And all the time they're doing that, you're just laughing because you're the one that's paying them. Huh? Wouldn't that be great? Think about that. Do you imagine funding a group that says Cracker, Honky, Peckerwood? Huh? Now who's the joke on? While they're down there at the grassroots level crying and moaning about, what color their skin is and, why they don't give them a break and all that other stuff, what are they doing? Well, they're ruling the world. They can't, part of their agenda is to completely socialize this country, to literally get rid of that which we refer to as our bordered nation. They want to get rid of what we call our national sovereignty. And this is why no nation can take us. And this is why I like 9/11. If there's anything positive about it. I'm not saying I like the fact that it happened. What I like about it is that American people turned around and said, we're not all the same. These people are screwed up. We don't like them either. I'm glad that from 9/11 on, there's folk we don't like. And we should not like them. There ain't nothing to like about folk like that. People want to blow us up and kill us. There's only one way to deal with folk like that. You blow them up and kill them. And people say, brother, you're too harsh. What about peace? You don't negotiate and talk peace with people that are insane. Somebody said, well, they don't like you. They don't like America because America's so rich and it spends its money on decadent things and lets the rest of the world starve. Well, the last I heard, Osama bin Laden was worth $300 million. How come he don't feed people? He spends his money blowing us up and not feeding his folk. Huh? How about all them Saudi sheiks? They don't like us. They like our gas money, but they don't like us. How come they don't spend any money on philanthropy or raising up their people? You think you like them? I don't like them. Screw them. God's going to get them at the end. Somebody says, oh, you shouldn't say it. Why not? God said it. He's going to get them. You read about these folk in there. God ain't playing with them. They're going to be the recipients of these plagues. These people have an agenda. Cecil Rhodes, Milner's Kindergarten, the Round Tables, the RIIF, the Father, or literally the parent organization, that which we now call the CFR, the Council on Foreign Relations. These are the people that literally don't establish these laws and these policies, but they discuss them and they become laws and policies. Now, we were reading about where they got their philosophy. We had gone far beyond that. Let's see, we're going to pick up on... we were talking about how the Lusitania was sunk, right? And how the Germans ran full-page ads telling people don't get on that boat. And how Winston Churchill pulled the escorts. And the reason he pulled the escorts was because Winston Churchill knew that he had to get America and the fighter was going to be a long, drawn-out battle. So they sunk the Lusitania, and the Americans got upset because Americans were killed on a cruise ship. Now, how many know when you kill Americans on a cruise ship, you're going to literally awaken a wrath in American people, because we're just like that. So America got mad, and World War I begun. All right. All right, we're going to read a couple things here. Former Senator Elihu Root, who later became the honorary president of the CFR, another New York elitist meeting at the Round Table Dining Club, the forerunner of the Council on Foreign Relations, couldn't believe their good fortune. Former U.S. Ambassador to England, Joseph H. Choate, as warm an Anglophile as any in America, openly said that the Zimmerman note was a forgery and practically unanimously supported by the whole bunch. And he's making reference to a letter that was written by an individual that was discussing openly the events that occurred to drag America into the war. So that's being challenged. Questions regarding the authenticity of the telegram were laid to rest on March 3rd at Berlin News Conference. Here, a Hearst News correspondent, who later turned out to be a German agent, that's nice, gave Zimmerman every chance to deny the telegram. Of course, Your Excellency will deny the story, urged the correspondent. Zimmerman was inexplicably announced, I cannot deny it is true. The simple confession produced the desired effect in America. Newspaper editorials railed against the Hun, and public pressure for war against the German Kaiser grew irresistible. Wilson, who had fought so long and so hard for a negotiated peace with himself as the leader of the League of Nations, was forced to declare war on April 6, 1917. 8 days later, money began to flow, and the passage of the War Loan Act authorized $1 billion in credit to the empty banks of the Allies. Now again, isn't that funny how as soon as America commits to war, suddenly there's $1 billion flowing to the Allied bank accounts? Isn't that nice? Isn't it wonderful to be a banker? Huh? While the Zimmerman telegram apparently was authentic, no one will ever know why something so audacious was produced or why it was acknowledged once it was discovered. World War I cost 323,000 American casualties, a pittance compared to the 9 million Russians, 6 million Frenchmen, 3 million British. The war also effectively ended any meaningful gold standard for money, although several nations tried to return it in the 1920s. Not only did the total expenditure of the United States for the war years rise to an unprecedented $35 trillion, but the fiat money supply, and that's money printed without any value, the fiat money supply, paper backed only by government edict, nearly doubled from 20.6 to 39.8 billion, which caused the purchasing power of the dollar to drop almost 50%. Tremendous amounts of debt were created, while only those who collected interest benefited. Of course. Always, it was the American public that suffered the real losses in dead relatives, devalued money, and enduring foreign commitments. The entry of America and the withdrawal of Russia was, following the revolution, guaranteed victory for the Allies in World War I. Hostilities ended by the Treaty of Versailles, signed by the belligerent nations June 28, 1919. Attending was Paul Warburg, who was also chairman of the Federal Reserve System, representing American banking interests. Now, when they signed the Treaty of Versailles, that which preceded the end of the war, quick question, why do bankers need to be there? Huh? Paul Warburg, chairman of the Federal Reserve System. Now remember Paul Warburg, he's the German guy who ended up the president of America's Federal Reserve Bank. He represented American banking interests, and his brother Max Warburg represented the German Central Bank. Now isn't that funny? Paul Warburg's in charge of America America's Federal Reserve Bank. Max Warburg, his brother, in charge of Germany. And who are we at war with? Isn't that funny? You think they're milking the cow at both ends here? Now, how many of you learned this at school? Huh? That the bankers were financing both sides of this. Now, you think they were happy with all this debt that was incurred? And this Treaty of Versailles, most of you know that Treaty of Versailles literally guaranteed another war. 20 years to the date they signed it, World War II breaks out. You think that was an accident? Maybe. Is all this an accident? I mean, because we can lay down the timeline in history, right? We can lay it down and say, oh yeah, just changing events caused this to happen. Just chance and luck, bad moves. Treaty of Versailles. These bankers, boy, I'll tell you. Attending Paul Warburg, chairman of the Federal Reserve System, represented American banking interests. Brother Max Warburg represented German Central Bank. His own M.M. Warburg and Company, who reportedly was involved with German intelligence during the war. President Wilson, who grew up in the South under harsh Reconstruction policies of the Republicans, knew firsthand the long-term misery and devastation caused by war. It seemed clear that his attempt to keep America out of the European war was based on sincere personal conviction, but it was equally clear that this noble impulse was subverted at every turn by the schemers in England and by his own advisors. Perhaps the most tragic aspect of the war to end all wars was that it didn't settle much of anything. The harsh terms of Versailles only prompted resentment in Germany and paved the way for Hitler. All sides soon began to rebuild, rearm, enriching lenders by greater spending and borrowing. British Foreign Secretary Lord Nathaniel Curzon, another delegate, said that he felt the treaty only set the stage for more war and even predicted the date. He said this is no peace, this is only a truce for 20 years. He said this in 1919. His comment, was it his comment or was it an informed prophecy? Generated much comment among conspiracy researchers since World War II indeed began in 1939, exactly 20 years later. Think it had anything to do with those bankers being there? All right. Curzon may have known precisely what he was talking about, as he attended both Oxford and All Souls College, the home ground of Cecil Rhodes and John Ruskin. Following his marriage to the daughter of a Chicago millionaire, he became the leader of the House of Lords in 1915, was a member of the inner cabinet that dictated policies of World War I. Marriage, it seems, plays an important role in connecting these early secret society members together. Money barons such as the Rockefellers of National City Bank, Chase Bank, J.P. Morgan of Morgan Company, Jacob Schiff of Kuhn and Lieb, and most important, the brothers Warburg tied into the plot, a neat knot, with Paul marrying Schiff's daughter, Felix Warburg marrying Lieb's brother, Max staying home in Germany where he could influence the Kaiser and help finance the Russian Revolution, noted Neil Wilgus in his non-fiction book called The Illuminoids, or The Illuminated. Now, we had read portion of this next chapter out of Pawns in the Game. There indeed exists a wealth of documentation indicating that the Russian Revolution, indeed the very creation of communism, sprang up from Western conspiracies before World War I. Now again, all we're doing is taking the views of about 10 of these men and this documented history that not only implies, but that lays out an alternative to that which we've been taught in school. We've been told all along that, Lenin took power in Petrograd, and suddenly the whole nation of Russia became communist, and they became this evil empire, and that they became the enemy of the free world. And what nobody ever told you was that they were created in the West. Isn't that something? That you could create an enemy and make everybody believe they're the evil empire, and you made them? There exists a wealth of documentation indicating the Russian Revolution, indeed the very creation of communism, sprang up from Western conspiracies before World War I. One of the greatest myths of contemporary history is that the Bolshevik Revolution in Russia was a popular uprising of the downtrodden masses against the hated ruling class of the czars, wrote author Griffin, who claimed that both planning and funding of the revolution came from financiers in Germany, Britain, and the United States. Now, you remember the French Revolution, right? Where the French people got tired. They said, these kings are full of crap. This imposed religion on us. We don't even believe it. And they call it the Age of Enlightenment. They all became so enlightened that they said, we don't need a king to tell us what to do. We don't need a church to tell us what to do. And they became accordingly so philosophically sound as individuals that they revolted against the whole thing. I don't need to tell you about the French. Huh? How enlightened are they? They ain't even enlightened enough to bathe. Huh? Them girls don't even know that you're supposed to shave your armpits and your legs. Huh? You got folk that, sit on a toilet that squirts water. And they think they're clean. Huh? Give it a fancy little name and they think they're clean. It's the same thing. The idea has been sold to us. We go to school and we get told that the people decided in Russia that they didn't like the czars. We don't like being ruled by them fellas. They're always trying to tell us what to do. We don't like that Russian Orthodox Church. We don't like that influence from the West. We don't like any of that. And that these people decided they wanted to uprise and depose the czars. That's what we've been taught, isn't it? That's what they teach you in school. That a bunch of people at the grassroots level said, hey, we don't like management. We like workers. Are you out of your mind? Think about it. You got to be out of your mind to think like that. The management is nothing. It's the workers. The managers have the money, they own the shop, but that shop would be nothing without the workers. That's why you fire them. If they don't work, you fire them, and you get you some folk that will. See, and this is exactly what our nation's headed for. I'll tell you, this is what workers say, we want you to raise the minimum wage. We don't even understand what's taking place. We don't understand that the same revolution is occurring in this country, just like the Word of God and just like history dictates. It's happening here. You got a bunch of folk running around, you need to pay us more. We want higher minimum wage. Now let me ask you this. Is this the grassroots people jumping up saying pay us more, or some politician with a bleeding heart with an agenda saying, I don't think we should pay those people so little bit of money? Los Angeles has a higher standard of living than most cities. Well, then if you can't afford it, go move. Huh? Either that or find a spot next to a dumpster. It's never been the government's job to tell somebody how much to pay you. How come we let the government do that? Now you got to pay them over $5.75 an hour and make sure they got benefits. What kind of crap is that? Is this movement at the grassroots level? Or some politician look down and say, I think $5.75 ain't good enough for folk. Huh? What's he doing? See, this Bolshevik revolution didn't start the way they tell us. These folk didn't have any idea what's going on. They didn't have any idea these folk are pulling the strings at the top level. These people have an agenda. They got to get rid of the Bill of Rights, they got to get rid of the Constitution, and they got to get rid of the church. And you don't think, and do you understand why they don't openly challenge the church, but what's being challenged about the church is everything that is represented by it? Why does everybody decide they just want to live together and not get married? You ever wonder why that happens? The reason that happens is because what's at stake now is what Ephesians 5 speaks of. That relationship between Christ and the church. If you got people just running around acting like they're married by moving in, they want to milk the cow and not have to buy it. Right? Why buy the cow if the milk's free? Right? Hey, that's good sense. Right? And you're under no obligation. You get tired of the milk, you go get another cow. Right? Now, what's under attack in essence? Is it the church? No, but the institutions. The institutions that the church sanctions. If the church, through the institution of marriage, what does the Bible say about marriage? Wives, submit yourselves to your husbands. So the very act of marriage implies a submitting and a subjection. If you attack the institution of marriage, you're not attacking the church, but you're making everything the church teaches obsolete and something that's anathema to the world and society at large. They're not going to come right out and say things like, hey, get rid of the church. They don't need to. They disseminate their ideas, and the people begin to decide, yeah, the church is full of it. The church doesn't like homos. They're narrow-minded, mean-spirited. They're un-American. Because, hey, by the way, I promise, you pay attention to the news. Un-American is the worst name you can be called now, and that's what they're going to start calling people. When politicians challenge each other's ideas, it's because they're un-American. When somebody does something that they don't feel is in line with their agenda, they're un-American. See, because America's supposed to be a land of opportunity and a land of free people, and if you don't like homosexuality, You're an American. Got to watch out for this stuff. But that's going to be the bad word of the day. That's going to be the new bad word of this age is coming. You're an American. I'll tell you what, America wasn't about homosexuals. America wasn't about having gay marriage, gay military. I'm for gays in the military. I am. I'm for gays in the military. Put them in uniform and put them out there with everybody else. Man, I'll tell you, every colonel needs his tent decorated. I'm for gays in the military. They probably make good POWs. I don't understand that they're trying to make, they're passing these agendas where the people at large, I'm telling you, as the ideas are disseminated from the top, what's under attack is the church, but the people don't understand it. Let them fight. Hand-to-hand combat. Scratch the enemy's eyes out. I tell you, they're mean. Use them for diversionary tactics. Just throw them out there in the desert and have them yell, "I'm here, I'm queer." Just like in the Bible, there's certain tactics that the devil utilizes that the devil just stays on these issues because they work. And we're seeing the same tactic repeated time and time and time again, and that is the fact or the idea that we're told that these revolutions or that these uprisings begin at a grassroots level when they don't. Listen, none of us are smart enough to start an agenda that's going to change things. We think we are. It starts from the top down. It's not the people's idea. It's not the idea of the masses. One of the greatest myths of contemporary history is that the Bolshevik Revolution in Russia was popular uprising of the downtrodden masses against the hated ruling class of czars, wrote Arthur Griffin, who claimed that both planning and funding from these revolutions came from Germany, Britain, and the United States. January 1917, Leon Trotsky was living in New York, working as a reporter for the New World, a communist newspaper. Trotsky had escaped from an earlier failed attempt at revolution in Russia, and he fled to France, where he was expelled for his revolutionary behavior. He soon discovered that there was a wealthy Wall Street banker who was willing to finance a revolution in Russia. One of the bankers was Jacob Schiff, very nice, whose family had lived with the Rothschilds in Frankfurt. Another was Elihu Root, attorney for Paul Warburg's Kuhn and Lieb and Company. According to New York Journal American, it's estimated by Jacob's grand these guys' money. Leon Trotsky, he had to go back to Russia. Everybody talks about how Trotsky went back and Lenin went back and this great revolution. They got there at the apex of the revolution. They got there just in time to take the throne. Those downtrodden masses just couldn't handle the czars telling them what to do. Now really, think about the essence of that type of government. French, we don't need to listen to no king. We don't need to listen to no church. And the Russians, we don't believe in God anymore. And we ain't going to listen to the czar. They have a human dictator, a human administrator that rules over the nation to make sure everybody gets theirs, right? Now think about it. As minority folk, what are we always talking about? I want to get mine. Huh? I want to get mine. I want to get my piece of the pie. And go get a job. Save some money. Then go buy it. And it'll be yours. But the idea that somebody's going to give it to you because you got brown skin or slanted eyes, that's a joke. It's just a mentality that's been sold to us, that we're so inefficient and incompetent that somebody's got to give it to us. Huh? You know, if Indians don't like being called chiefs, redskins, and all that stuff, they can get up and go kick somebody's butt. You know, if somebody called me a name I didn't like it, eventually I'm going to get fed up and I'm going to call their mother some real ugly name, or I'm going to sock you. People get mad at that. You can teach people you don't like things and they'll change it. They're not unreasonable. They ain't stupid. Yeah, people got the idea that, we're just supposed to stand there with our hand out. And every time we stand there with our hand out, now we've talked about this on the mission field. We want to change that. Every time you got your hand out, every time somebody gives it to you, what you're saying is, I'm inferior. I'd have never got this myself. Thank you, Massa. Oh, you owed it to me. Oh, all the pain you've caused my ancestors. Oh, you owed it to me. Somebody says, nobody's ever paid us back. Nobody's ever paid you back. There's welfare, there's food stamps, there's free education, they got job training. It's all free. What you mean you ain't got nothing back? Huh? That just drives me crazy listening to people talk. What's the term? I want to get mine. Give me my peace. And what's happening while we're running around trying to get our peace? What are we saying in essence? Give me mine because I'm a nothing. Give me mine because I can't get my own. Give me mine because you owe me and you're a nothing. Can you imagine you're an American? Man, it's on your birth certificate. You have rights, you have privilege, you got everything. We might have a couple, again, I'm not denying this. We might have a couple obstacles white people don't have if we got color on our skin. But guess what? Man, you're better off than most people anywhere else on this planet. And you can get yours. The whole idea is, man, they got you fighting over stuff. These people, do you believe these people orchestrate these things? Listen, how stupid would you feel? I mean, if even the kings of the earth in the book of Revelation, the Bible says God gave it in their heart, or God put it in their heart to hate the whore. Why would they hate her? Man, because I would hate to have a crown on my head, or I'd hate to stand there and get sworn in front of a bunch of people on television and know that I'm not the real boss. Huh? Let the media call you the most powerful man in the world. There's nothing you can do. If the Federal Reserve Bank wants to call depression, inflate the money, deflate the money. Guy in the Federal Reserve got a 14-year term. You only got a 4-year term. These people understand what's going on. We just don't. Don't have any idea how privileged we are because we got papers. These folk, devil ain't stupid. If it works, he keeps doing it. We're undergoing the same revolution they went through in France. We're undergoing the same revolution they went through in Russia. We just don't know it because we think we're privileged. The king don't know nothing. And what are they really trying to do? Get rid of the king. Because he's arbitrary. The king of kings, he gives a command or he gives a mandate and you don't get to say nothing back. Nobody ever tells us these American bankers gave these folk $20 million. Back in these days, that was a lot of money. Schiff and Root were not alone. Arsene Digulovich, who was present during the early days of the Bolsheviks, later wrote, in private interviews, I've been told that over 21 million rubles were spent by Lord Milner in financing the Russian Revolution. Well, that's 41 million. Oh, Mr. Milner, huh? What's Mr. Milner's goal? English control of the planet. Recall that it was Alfred Milner who was the primary force behind Rhodes's roundtables. The grand ancestor of the modern-day secret societies. In 1915, American International Corporation was formed to fund the Russian Revolution. Its directors represented the interests of the Rockefellers, the Rothschild, the DuPonts, Kuhn, Lieb, Harriman, and the Federal Reserve. Now, nobody believes that evil empire, Russia, with Nikita Khrushchev and all those evil dictators were made in America. Nobody believes that, huh? Let's read a little bit here. We just finished reading out of Rule by Secrecy. Now we're going to read Gary Allen, None Dare Call It Conspiracy. Chapter 6, Rockefellers and the Reds, the most important American of those different personages who run the world from behind the scenes are the Rockefellers. The Rockefeller clan reportedly worked with the Rothschilds and their agents since 1880s, when the original John D. arranged to get a rebate on every barrel of oil he and his competitors shipped to Kuhn-Lieb and Company, controlled Pennsylvania and Baltimore and Ohio railroads. It has been a profitable partnership ever since. The involvement of the Rockefellers with their supposed blood enemies, the communists, dates back to the Bolshevik Revolution. During the 1920s, Lenin established his new economic policy, the same name Nixon applied to his wage price control package. Now see, doesn't it bother anybody that Nixon would call this price control package of his the same name that Lenin used to establish communism? Does it bother you? I mean, you want to know how subtle it is? It always drives me crazy when they say the president appointed his drug czar. Now that we've got problems with electricity, they appointed an energy czar. Does it bother you that in America, this free country, they are calling people czars? And they call their contemporaries their comrades. Those ain't English words. They're not American. How come we sit there and let the news people talk like this? Huh? Why would we call a guy a drug czar? A cabinet post in Washington. Why would we call them drug czars? Why would we call them energy czars? Huh? I'm telling you. No, I'm not telling you got to watch out around every corner. Some commies going, John, it ain't going to happen. They're already here. The involvement of the Rockefellers with their supposed blood enemies, the communists, date back to the Bolshevik Revolution. During the 1920s, Lenin established his new economic policy, the same name Mr. Nixon applied to his wage price control package, when he supposedly hated capitalists. When the supposedly hated capitalists were invited back into Russia. The Federal Reserve, CFR insiders began pushing to open up communist Russia to U.S. traders soon after the revolution. However, at that time, public opinion ran so high against the Bolsheviks because of their barbarism that it was official U.S. government policy not to deal with the outlaw government. But the U.S. did not officially recognize the Bolsheviks until 1933. In the meantime, the Soviet economy was in shambles and the people were starving to death. Communism would have collapsed had it not been aided by these insiders. The Bolsheviks were originally saved from collapse by Herbert Hoover, who raised money to buy food, which was appropriated by Lenin and his gangsters. Now, you all know who Herbert Hoover is, right? This guy actually put money up to save them folk. If they were such a hated evil empire, why'd we feed them? They used it as a tool to subdue starving peasants who had been resisting their newly imposed slave masters. While Hoover's humanitarian gesture saved the Soviet regime, the Russian economy was still in total chaos. In came the Vanderlips, Harrimans, and Rockefellers. One of the first to jump in was Frank Vanderlip, an agent of the Rockefellers, one of the Jekyll Island conspirators, president of Rockefeller First National City Bank, who compared Lenin to George Washington. And that's quoted from Louis Baden's The Bolshevik Invasion of the West. The Rockefellers assigned their public relations agent, Ivy Lee, to sell the American public the idea that the Bolsheviks were merely misunderstood idealists who were actually kind benefactors to mankind. Now, listen, how many of you are hearing things about even the Iraqis? They're not so bad. Huh? I mean, I hear this on the news. I'm listening to these guys all of a sudden, well, I don't think President Bush's war on terrorism is going so good because we haven't caught bin Laden. I guess that shows how much of a failure we've done. And they're talking bad about these fellows like we're just misunderstanding these poor Muslims. Look, what's there to understand? They want to blow you up. Huh? Is there anything to understand? You read the Koran, it says you're not supposed to hang around with infidels. You're supposed to kill them. You need to understand any more? Let me see. They blew up the coal. They tried to blow up the World Trade Center before. They blow up airports. They blew up embassies. They blew up troop quarters abroad. Muslims blow things up. I like what Dan Zan said. They are cowards. Because if you're a martyr, you just kill yourself. These guys don't kill themselves. They kill everybody else. Does anybody misunderstand this? So how can we sit there and watch these TV jackasses, these talking head, good-for-nothing pea-brains? How hard is it to read something that's sitting in front of you? Huh? You really think these people think? And then they interview them on Letterman and the Tonight Show like if they have an opinion? Huh? these news people are a bunch of jerks. That's why they hate preachers. Because preachers got to come from the heart, from the word, from what God gives. These people got to come from a teleprompter. See, preachers, they compete with newscasters. Newscasters think they got the answer for the world. They ain't got crap. There ain't going to be no news table in hell. I'll tell you, newsmen are right in there with French people. So the Rockefellers assigned public relations agents to sell the American public, but Bolsheviks are merely misunderstood idealists who are actually kind benefactors of mankind. How many have been hearing all these nice stories about these Muslims? Huh? Oh, they're just misunderstood. Muslims, they're a peaceful religion. How come every time somebody blows something up, kidnaps Americans abroad, how come they're always Muslims? I never heard of a Jehovah's Witness blowing up something. Huh? I never heard of a Mormon cult group in the Philippines getting an American businessman taken out in the jungle and chopping off his head because he didn't get paid. Anybody ever hear that? Huh? You ever hear of Christians going around blowing everybody up? I mean, listen, if we were really that bad, if Christians were really that bad, we'd go kick the daylights out of everybody. We got the means to do it. What's there to understand? These people are acting like the Bolsheviks are cool. And see, listen, who runs the media, by the way? We'll talk about that too. But if Rockefeller immediately sends out his press agents to convince the American people that, hey, these people are cool, they're benign, we just don't understand them. Isn't that what we're seeing now during this war on terrorism? Everybody's telling, and these news people, they're such jerks. They think we're stupid. They think every time we see somebody with a turban, we want to kill them. So they got to run these specials. Not all turban-headed people are terrorists. You think you didn't know that? Huh? They got to warn us. If the lady's wearing this outfit, you got to be nice to her. Who's mistreated anybody like that? Now, I guarantee you, man, some lady like that or a fella like that getting in an airplane, I want them strip searched. I want the full cavity search. When they come in that plane, they better not have on no shoes. I want to see something sewn on their shirt that says inspected by number 51 or something like that. That way, if something happens to the plane, man, my family knows who to get. Professor Anthony Sutton of Stanford University's Hoover Institute, by the way, he got kicked out of that institute. He notes in his highly authoritative Western technology and Soviet economic development, quite predictably 180 pages later, Lee concludes that the communist problem is merely psychological. By this time, he's talking about Russians, not communists. He concludes that they are all right. He suggests that the United States should not engage in propaganda, makes pleas for peaceful coexistence, and suggests that the United States would find it sound policy to recognize the USSR and advance its credits. That sound like something you want to do? Now, by the way, what they're not telling you is how many people the Russians had to kill to take power. Millions. You know, in the 20th century, more people died by the hands of Russians, by this communist revolution. More people died by the hands of that than any other war combined. And we're supposed to believe they're okay? Huh? They're worse than Hitler. They killed more folk than Hitler. And they're telling everybody they're okay? After the Bolshevik Revolution, Standard of New Jersey bought 50% of Nobel's huge Caucasus oil fields, even though the property had theoretically been nationalized. Well, that's nice. Go buy 50% of these Russian oil fields. In 1927, Standard Oil in New York built a refinery in Russia. How many of you knew that? Thereby helping the Bolsheviks put their economy back on its feet. This was the first United States investment in Russia since the revolution. Shortly thereafter, Standard Oil in New York and its subsidiary, Vacuum Oil, concluded a deal to market Soviet oil in European countries, because we wouldn't have it. And it was reported a loan of $75 million to the Bolsheviks was arranged. We have been unable to find out if Standard Oil was even theoretically expropriated by the communists, says Sutton. Professor Sutton proves conclusively in his 3 volumes of History of Soviet Technology Development that the Soviet Union was almost literally manufactured by the USA. How do you like that? Rockefeller's Chase National Bank, who also was involved in selling the Bolshevik bonds in the United States. In 1928, patriotic organizations denounced Chase as an international fence. Chase was called a disgrace to America. They'll go to any lengths for a few dollars in profits. The Soviet government has been given United States Treasury funds by the Federal Reserve Board and the Federal Reserve Bank acting through Chase Manhattan Bank, Guarantee Trust Company, and other banks in New York City. Open up the books of Amtorg, the trading organization of the Soviet government in New York, and of Gastorg, the general office of the Soviet Trade Organization, and the State Bank of Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, and you'll be staggered to see how much American money has been taken from the United States to benefit Russia. Find out what business has transacted for the State Bank of Soviet Russia by its correspondent, the Bank of New York. Professor Sutton proves exclusively that Stalin paid tribute to the assistance rendered by the United States to the Soviet industry before and during the war. He said about two-thirds of all large industrial enterprise in the Soviet Union had been built with the United States or using their technical assistance. Two-thirds. Two-thirds of Russian industry was built by us. Now, did they tell you that in school? We build two-thirds of their industry, and then we crap our pants because they make missiles. Huh? Now, see, I'm one of them kids that grew up in Los Angeles having to do that duck and cover thing. All right? Get under the table and, put your head down there between your knees and, kiss your butt goodbye. Giving you the impression that if a nuclear strike hit Los Angeles, you're going to live. Why in the world do you want to die in that position? As I got older, I found out there were several others I'd rather assume. Sutton shows that there is hardly a segment of the Soviet economy which was not a result of transference of Western, particularly American technology. Now, I'm not going to read it today, but in Mars's book, as well as in Shadows of Power, one of the things that's mentioned is that since the government now, remember we talked about this guy Baruch, who was actually given a position to actually grant out government contracts during the war? Do you have any idea what that fellow was doing? Since that fellow was given government contracts to American machine shops and to these huge American industries, since he's the one that had the money, he would walk up to him and say, "I gave you $5 million last year. Give me the plans to that new bomber." What do you think the guy's going to say? Knowing he's dependent on American money like that or bank money like that. He's going to give up the plans. Now, the banker that takes the plans, he ain't an engineer. He don't know what to do with those plans. But you know what he did with those plans? He went and gave them to the Russians. Now, listen, I don't know about you. Do you ever watch some of those shows on television? I guess they have them like on the History Channel. It used to drive me crazy, man. I always have been one of these kids that was fascinated with fighter planes ever since I was a kid. Man, I had a model of the stealth bomber before anybody even thought it was real. You remember those? Just had curved wings instead of the triangle-looking wings. It looked the same. Somebody was leaking information back to some model company. But I was always fascinated with these things. F-14 Tomcats, F-15s, F-18, F-111s. I was always fascinated with fighter jets. I used to love fighter jets, and I used to build them. And what drove me crazy was when I'd get those books, and they'd say, the Russian Air Force. And I'd pick it up and say, "Hey, how come they look the same? It says Bearcat, but that's a B-1. You ever notice their space shuttle looks like ours? Come on. What the hell is wrong with us? You ever notice their stuff looks like our stuff? How does that happen? You think two engineers on two completely different sides of the world separated by oceans one day sat down under, an engineer lamp and decided to draw blueprints, and lo and behold, they both had the same design? That used to drive me crazy. I'm over here, listening to all this great technology we have, and all of a sudden I look up, the Russian military gear, and they got our stuff. They just got a star on it. Well, now we know why. You got a guy like Bernard Baruch and these fellows who go over there and say, "Don't I give you a lot of money for a contract?" "Yeah, give me the blueprints." Now, I'll tell you what, it drives me even more crazy to know that you got Hughes Aircraft, that you got TRW, that you got Douglas, that you got these companies creating space labs, and the same people are funding them. And that the same people come over and say, "Let me have the technology to those satellites. Give me the prints. Give me pictures." And everybody gets afraid of a Chinese guy that worked on it. Huh? They shouldn't be prosecuting these poor schmucks as spies. They ought to be getting these people who give up all the information. This is terrible. Sutton shows that there's hardly a segment of the Soviet economy that is not a result of transference of Western, particularly American technology. This cannot be wholly the result of an accident. For 50 years, the Federal Reserve, CFR, Rockefeller insider crowd has advocated and carried out policies aimed at increasing the power of their satellite, the Soviet Union. Now, there are a lot of people that look at you like, oh, no way. I'm telling you, after the war, that country had nothing. They're ready to die. Says, meanwhile, the Americans spent $75 billion a year on defense to protect themselves from the enemy the insiders are building up. Now, this is back in '75 during the Cold War, when everybody was afraid we're going to get blown up by the Russians. I'll tell you what, I'd be mad. I mean, I'm mad now just thinking of these clowns. Listen, all we're crying about is I want mine. These guys have an agenda that's so far beyond that stuff. What has been true of the past is even more valid today. The leader in promoting the transfer of technology and increasing aid and trade with the communists is the Council on Foreign Relations. Why would they transfer technology to them? On October 7, 1966, President Lyndon Johnson, a man who had appointed a CFR member virtually to every strategic position in his administration, stated, "We intend to press for legislative authority to negotiate trade agreements which could extend most favored nation tariffs treatment to European communist states. We will reduce export controls on East-West trade with respect to hundreds of non-strategic items." Now, this is important here by Lyndon Johnson, 66. This is a guy that was crying about Vietnam, and you'd get upset when you find out what this trade agreement he entered us into, what it did to Vietnam. The United States put into effect today one of President Johnson's proposals for stimulating East-West trade by removing restrictions on the export of more than 400 commodities to the Soviet Union and Eastern Europe. Among the categories which items had been selected for exportation relaxation were vegetables, cereals, fodder, hides, crude and manufactured rubber, pulp and waste paper, textiles, fibers, crude fertilizers, metal ores, scrap petroleum, gas derivatives, chemical compounds, product dyes, medicines, fireworks, detergents, plastic materials, metal products, machinery, and scientific professional instruments. Virtually every one of these non-strategic items has a direct or indirect use in war. Later items such as rifle cleaning compounds, electronic equipment were declared non-strategic and cleared for shipment to the Soviet Union. The trick is simply to declare that almost everything was non-strategic. A machine gun is still considered strategic, therefore you cannot ship it to the communists. But the tools for making the machine gun and the chemicals to propel the bullets were declared non-strategic. Isn't that fun? Meanwhile, 50,000 Americans died in Vietnam. Now, who was supplying the Vietnamese? The Russians and the Chinese. Where'd they get all these materials? This jackass. Now, I don't know about you, but doesn't that drive you? I'll tell you what, 50,000 Americans died. Everybody gets mad at, quote unquote, the gook. How come nobody was mad at President Johnson? No wonder when you see his administration face. You know, he didn't even want to be president again, did he? You ever see those pictures of him? He's always sitting there, got a conscience like he don't want nothing to do with it, huh? You wonder why, huh? The Viet Cong and the North Vietnamese received 85% of their war materials from Russia and the Soviet bloc nations. Did anybody ever tell you that? 85% of their war materials from Russia and the Soviet bloc nations. Since their economies are incapable of supporting war, the communist arm of the conspiracy needed help from the finance capitalist arm. The United States have been financing and equipping both sides of the terrible Vietnamese war, killing our own soldiers by proxy. Again, the landscape painters in the mass media have kept the American public from learning the provable fact. Not surprisingly, the Rockefellers have also been leaders in championing the bloody trade. On January 16, 1967, one of the most incredible articles to ever appear in a newspaper graced the front page of the establishment's daily, the New York Times. Under the headline, "Eaton joins Rockefellers to spur trade with the Reds." An alliance of family fortunes linking Wall Street to the Midwest is going to try to build an economic bridge between the free world and the communist Europe. The International Basic Economy Corporation, controlled by the Rockefeller brothers and Tower International, headed by Cyrus Eaton Jr., Cleveland financier, is planned to cooperate in promoting trade between the Iron Curtain countries, which include the Soviet Union. Among the non-strategic items which Rockefeller and Eaton the Eaton Axis are going to build for the communists are 10 rubber goods plants, including 2 synthetic rubber plants worth $200 million. Mr. Eaton explained in the Times, these people are setting up new automobile plants. And now they know they have to have tire factories. Now, when did the Russians ever famous for cars? Under the Nixon administration, which contrary to campaign promises, he multiplied trade with the Reds tenfold. American concerns are building the world's largest truck factory for the communists. Now that gets me mad because I hated the idea that I was brought up thinking these guys were going to blow us up. And Nixon is building them their factories, man. Trucks are necessary for the nation's war machine. In fact, every time I see a Russian missile parade, they're all on trucks. Trucks are necessary for the nation's war machine, and truck factories had to be converted for the production of tanks, as was done during World War II. The U.S. provided the Soviets with both facilities to build the trucks and the tires, or tank treads, for them to roll on. In addition, Rockefellers and the Eatons are constructing a $50 million aluminum producing plant for the Reds. Aluminum for jets is considered non-strategic. We'll stop there. But they got pictures here of Rockefeller and Nikita Khrushchev just grinning like they're good old boys. Now I know why they're smiling. I'll tell you, this is crazy. Basically shows how the Rockefellers gave the Russians our technology. All right. I'm going to make copies of those pages that we read, and we'll get them next week, I promise. That way you can look at them yourself. Any questions before we go there?